Utilitarianism is a doctrine that was founded by Jeremy Bentham, a philosopher during the late 18th and early 19th century. The doctrine states that regardless of the actions you perform, if the end result achieves the most amount of happiness and the least amount of pain to those involved, then the action is considered ethical. However, if the actions taken inflict more pain than happiness, then those actions are considered unethical. Utilitarians are also less concerned about the consequences of one individual, but rather of the entire society. Bentham also promoted the concept of empiricism, which is the belief that we obtain knowledge through our senses, what we observe, what we experience, what we theorize, and revising thought as new evidence emerges. Utilitarianism is driven by empirical science-based revisions and conclusions as the foundations for knowledge. This is contrasted by the older line of thought called rationalism, which is the belief that knowledge is obtained innately or through reasoning rather than relying on empirical data and research. Citan Uzuki is a great example of how utilitarianism is represented in Xenogears. The majority of Citan's actions are guided by this belief, which causes him to make some rather unethical decisions, but he believes he is doing the right thing. And despite being a playable party member for the majority of the game, he acts on behalf of Solaris, specifically taking direct orders from Cain to observe Faye, not to align with him, but in order to determine if he is a threat to humanity. It would be incorrect to call him an ally, at least initially, as Citan's time with Faye was mostly about gathering intelligence for Cain, rather than considering Faye's well-being. Xenogears is a game where the theme of morality is at the forefront of the experience, and the motivations of the protagonist and antagonist are not always black and white. And while you may not agree with their actions, you can at least understand why they thought it was the right thing to do according to them. Faye was initially reluctant to fight, but the turning point was when Bart's hideout was invaded and children were about to be killed. Bart and his companions engaged in piracy but justify their actions because they believe restoring Bart to the throne is the right thing to do, even though Bart made it a republic per her father's wishes. Even Krelian and Graf both believed what they were doing was ultimately for the greater good. And Cain, the father of mankind, began to doubt whether resurrecting Deus was the right thing to do after he felt guilt for killing Abel and Ellie at the beginning of civilization. In this video, we will analyze Citan's character, starting with his background and then going chronologically through his morally questionable decisions throughout the game. Like most of the other characters in the story, Citan wrestles with his own internal struggles. As a spy for Cain, he has to lie even to his friends Sigurd and Jesse about his reasons for being on the surface, as well as to everyone else, all while determining if he should eliminate Faye. Because of his ambiguous alignment, deception, and utilitarian ethics, he is sometimes portrayed by fans of Xenogears as being cold, indifferent, even malicious, but once we analyze Citan, we'll see that each of his actions were utilitarian in nature, with the end goal to save humanity, even if he had to eliminate Faye in the process. In the Japanese script, his name is Citan, which translates to Rosewood in English, but for obvious reasons it was changed when localized. Also, Citan Uzuki is also a codename used for spying on Faye, as his real name is Hyuga Riktu. However, I will refer to him as Citan for the rest of the analysis. Citan is a calculating individual who is intelligent, thoughtful, and thinks logically rather than emotionally. For the majority of the game, he is a high-ranking member of Solaris, commits morally ambiguous actions, and does not always have Faye's best interest in mind. Although he accompanies and assists Faye, he makes morally questionable decisions and dire mistakes with literally world-changing consequences along the way. Let's first start with his background. Citan was born in the year 9970 in Solaris' capital, Etranec, as a third-class citizen, or the Working Bees as they were known. He had 8 other brothers and was considered to be intellectually brilliant even at a young age. When he was 12, a virus was accidentally released and spread throughout the third-class level where Citan and his family resided, killing his entire family, his grandfather who taught him the art of the sword, and many civilians living in the area. Although never proven, it was suspected that Citan was responsible for releasing the virus, and he was driven out of his home by the surviving population as a result. As a utilitarian, he was likely experimenting and trying to gain knowledge, but made a very deadly mistake in the process. Despite being a third-class citizen, at the age of 15 he was able to enter the prestigious Jujin Military Academy with the assistance of Ramses. There he was recruited into the Elite Elements group as the Water Element and befriended Jesse and Sigurd. At age 20, he continued his rise up through the Solaris ranks and became a Guardian Angel, which meant he took direct orders from Cain and the Ministry themselves. Citan is a very skilled swordsman at this point. Throughout his career, he served Solaris faithfully. Given his strong intellectual ability, he created Ramses's Wyvern, Vierge's Air Rods, Action's Frame, the Bunt Line, Stone's Alkenshell, and the Element's Gears. Also consider that the bunt line that Citan designed was originally intended for the pilot to be included in the warhead, which would result in the pilot's death. When Jesse used the bunt line against the Alkenshell, Citan was surprised that Jesse didn't die because he wasn't aware that Jesse was able to modify the bunt line to not include the pilot in the warhead. Given that Jesse is likely a lot less technical and intelligent than Citan, it's more likely that Citan at this point in his life intended to use the pilot as a weapon in order to increase the output of the warhead and wasn't concerned about the loss of the pilot's life. Tasked with the third invasion of Chevet, he encounters and battles with the sage Gaspar Uzuki, though it resulted in a draw. During the occupation, he met Gaspar's daughter Yui, whom Citan fell in love with. As Citan and Yui's relationship progressed, he questioned using swords as a tool for destruction and thus gave up his sword to Yui and instead relied on his martial arts training that Gaspar had taught him. While this might seem contradictory to the theory of actions not mattering as long as the consequences are for the greater good, utilitarians consider fighting to be a last resort, that force should be used only proportional for their goals, and to minimize harm to all parties involved. Citan and Yui eventually marry and have a daughter named Midori, who has unexplained psychic powers and cannot speak. A couple of years later, Faye's mother Karen, who has been taking over as Miang, notices that her son Faye is the final contact. Cain, believing in the Ananobi prophecy that predicts someone would rise up and free humanity from its fate of being parts Vidaeus, tasks Citan to watch over Faye and determine if he will destroy humanity or be the one to sever their destiny of being biological parts Vidaeus. And this is where the game begins. Solaris stations Citan in the mountaintops near Lahan, and he becomes the town doctor as cover. However, the journey to reach him, at least in an effort to notify him that someone needed assistance in the village, would be fraught with danger as the path contains aggressive monsters, wolves, and requires a leaping jump of faith where falling will likely result in death or multiple broken bones if they don't succeed. When Faye meets Citan at his house, we see the first example of Citan intentionally triggering Faye's subconscious by playing a music box that Faye's prior self Kim had created for his daughter Emeralda back in the Zeboim era. Faye recognizes this music because, as the currently living contact, his memories are organically transmigrated from all the other prior contact's memories into his. While Citan likely wanted to slowly introduce the idea that there are multiple Fays to him over time, he felt safe enough around Faye to have them be around his wife and daughter, the latter of whom could sense Faye's inner demons via her psychic powers. That night, unbeknownst to Citan, Graf sets up the peaceful village of Lahan to be a battlefield between Kislev and Gebler forces in order to have Id immediately drawn out of Faye, as Graf wants to use Id in order to destroy the world. His initial plan works as Faye is drawn to Weltal and pilots it despite Citan's insistence not to do so. After Faye watches Timothy die, Id emerges and destroys the village and most of the inhabitants. After this event, Citan's plan of slowly introducing Faye to his subconscious falls apart, though he still pushes to repair Weltal and have Faye pilot it despite Faye just having obliterated an entire village and everyone he knew using the same gear. After the Lahan disaster, Citan believes it's best that Faye not stay around any longer and to venture through the Black Moon Forest to Ava by himself. Citan contacts his wife Yui up in Chevet, and the country rescues the remaining villagers that were able to escape. This is why Faye sees Shevat flying overhead as he enters the Dazzle Desert because they had just picked up the survivors in Lahan. While in the forest, Faye meets Ellie and eventually the Raincard dragon. Citan appears with Weltal and his land crab, and Faye decides on his own to pilot it in order to save Ellie. It's also here that we start to learn that Citan knows a lot more than he appears to. In Dazzle, Citan steals a dune buggy, and I say steals because he presumably never returns it, to head into the desert to scavenge parts to prepare Weltal. He tells Faye, who is 18 by the way, to go waste time getting drunk at the bar. Not wanting to end up murdered in the alleyway of a town in the middle of nowhere where the only entertainment is getting shit-faced at the bar and then doing donuts and dune buggies, Faye decides to take his chances on foot with no supplies in the unforgiving desert. I'm pretty sure the dune buggy could have fit 2 people, but that's okay because after you get tired of walking in sand, he spooks an Ava soldier and steals his bike, leaving him stranded in the middle of the desert. After using Weltal again to fight off some Ava troopers as well as a worm, Citan shows his fallibility by not keeping a lookout while repairing the damaged high-profile gear, which causes both himself and Faye to be captured by Ava troops and almost killed when Bart struck their ship with a missile. This is also the first time we see Citan apparently telepathically somehow reporting back to Cain. After becoming friendly with the pirates, we see Citan again showing to be suspiciously aware of the world for a doctor living near a small village in the middle of nowhere. When the Yggdrasil is attacked, he pilots Heimdall, a fist-based martial arts gear that average pilots cannot control, in defense. Even Mason is confused as to how a doctor is able to pilot such a difficult gear. And while he technically has access to his Omni gear Fenrir, he made a commitment not to kill anyone with a sword, and his morals adhere to proportionality when it comes to combat. In Bledavik, during the rescue operation involving Margie, Citan suggests that Faye enter the tournament rather than himself, a much more capable fighter, in order to create a distraction. Citan's motivations appear to be rooted in his preference for maintaining a low profile while closely observing Faye. During the respite in Nisan, Faye discovers Citan and Sigurd's origins in Solaris. Despite both fleeing the country at separate times, their departures were driven by distinct motives. However, Citan fabricates details regarding his escape, continuing his pattern of misleading the party. Citan develops a war plan in order to help Bart reclaim his throne. His plan is to use Nisan, a country which has purposely avoided the Ignis War for 500 years, as bait to make it appear as if they have allied with Kislev in order to assist Bart with reclaiming his throne. The plan ultimately fails. Ava invades Nisan and presumably kills as many people as they can, while the rest escape to wherever they can go. This battle also resulted in Id manifesting after watching his companions die, unleashing hell on the battlefield and crushing the Yggdrasil, almost killing everyone on board. And although he takes an escape pod after Id attacks the Yggdrasil, he seems genuinely conflicted about this and at least appears to only go at the behest of Bart and Sigurd. When Faye winds up a prisoner in Nortun's D-Block, he pulls strings to have the legitimate doctor removed in order to become the D-Block doctor where Faye is housed. He quickly abandons his post, leaving no doctor to help in D-Block. Later, he meets the doctor he had transferred out, and she rightfully calls him out for his negligence, and it's probably the only time in the game that Citan became submissive and apologized for his actions. Still in Nortun, when Id murders the battlers, despite Citan knowing it was Faye/Id, he proliferates the narrative that it was Redrum in the sewers, who was not violent, used to be human, and had a small son who was still looking for him, and only attacked the party because they stole his bell. After Redrum is killed and the party makes it near the surface, Citan likely knew Redrum used to be human, but needed to pawn him off as a scapegoat for the killings in order to throw the scent off of Faye. Given Citan's utilitarian nature, he respectfully buries the body of Redrum. This is a weird one. After Ellie was mind-controlled by Miang and she sabotaged the engines, he told the party that he would shoot Ellie if she acted out again. I verified that was accurate in the Japanese script as well. Does Citan have a gun? After being shot down in the Goliath by Bart's Yggdrasil, Citan implies he has the skills to keep the Goliath in the air in order to have the best possible landing. Instead, he crashes the plane straight into the Yggdrasil despite having an entire ocean to land in. Despite having direct communication with Chevette as evidenced by the rescue of the Lahan villagers, he allows the party to climb the treacherous Babel Tower in order to reach Chevette when they could have just picked him up from the surface. In Shavat, he removes the limiters from the party, which increases their AP, except Citan never had a limiter in him, so he was just holding back this whole time. Again, likely due to his adherence of proportionality in combat. In the Soylent facility, Citan chose not to eat the food himself, aware of its origin, but opted to let Ellie and Faye consume it without informing them. His decision stemmed from a belief that they needed the energy to continue despite the inevitable shock that they would face upon discovering they had just eaten Wells as they moved into the next room. Citan's actions could be seen as providing necessary sustenance to hungry companions with limited options, although he denied them the autonomy to make an informed choice, similar to the unwitting populace who regularly consume Wells without knowledge of its true nature. In Krelian's lab, the party begins to suspect Citan after he is called out for all of his suspicious behavior, and when he can't keep up the lie anymore, he allows Faye and Ellie to be captured, where Krelian runs experiments on Ellie and Citan taunts Faye with cruelty in an attempt to have Id manifest. However, he does rescue them afterwards and claims the reason he brought them all here was because it's the only facility that can remove the mental limiters in him, and also to destroy the gate. While at the gate, Citan meets Ramses but turns on him, declaring that he has decided to stick with Faye's group instead of supporting Solaris, though Citan is the one who snapped him out of his feelings of being trashed later in the Yggdrasil when the party welcomes him. His most consequential mistake was when he miscalculated the outcome of the attack on the Macabre, which caused it to fall to the planet with Ellie on board. This annihilated the Ignis continent and everything occupy it, along with wiping out both Kislev and Aviv and causing Shavat to crash to the ground. Basically, the vast majority of the remaining survivors on the planet were wiped out. The few who survive live scattered across the world or take refuge in the crashed remains of Shavat, which is now called the Snowfield Hideout. With Deus's arc no longer operational, he takes his final, much more powerful form and begins to terraform the entire planet into its new vessel. In essence, many of Citan's actions were motivated by the theory of utilitarianism, such as prioritizing for the greater good. Citan's actions are often guided by a desire to protect humanity and achieve the greater good, even if it means making difficult choices or sacrificing individual interests. He has rational decision making. He approaches problems with a logical and analytical mindset, weighing the potential consequences of his actions to achieve the best possible outcome. He puts an emphasis on knowledge and understanding. His pursuit of knowledge and his work as a scientist reflect the utilitarian value of informed decision making and the importance of understanding the world around us. He's willing to make tough decisions, and throughout the game, Citan has made a lot of tough decisions that may not align with his personal feelings, but ultimately benefit the greater good. And he focuses on long-term consequences. His actions and decisions often consider the long-term implications, demonstrating a utilitarian focus on creating the best possible future. His character is complex and multifaceted, not unlike many of the other characters in this game. He is another example of the intricate themes of morality and ethics that are prevalent throughout Xenogears. His journey from an outcast to a loyal Solaris agent to someone who must confront his own moral values and decide where his true allegiance lies makes his arc feel natural. As someone driven by utilitarianism, his actions don't always appear to be ethical, which has led the party and even players to question his motivations and morals. Though often seen as insensitive, his actions are driven by a belief in the greater good, even at the cost of personal relationships and moral ambiguity. Despite his questionable actions and the ambiguity surrounding his motives, Citan ultimately plays a crucial role in Faye's journey and the fate of society in Xenogears.